more to be implicit forms of bigotry and discrimination. And as a result, they tend to be outside awareness and have extreme power because a person, let me give you an example of this. A typical microaggression may be an assumption of criminality. That is that, a person who believes consciously that they aren't biased or they don't stereotype, when they walk close to a person of color, may all of a sudden find themselves uncomfortable, will check their wallet, clutch their purse more closely. These are nonverbal microaggressions that communicate to the person of color that you are a criminal, that you are up to no good. Now, microaggressions can be very damaging, as we saw in the number of Black men who are unarmed Black men who are being killed by white police officers who would not consider themselves to be biased. But in essence, the implicit hidden bias or fear that they have is that Black men are dangerous criminals up to no good. So on a conscious level, they'll say, no, I don't believe that about Black men. But on a subtle, unconscious level, when they're placed in stressful situations, like encountering a suspect, they will act on the implicit bias they have. So that microaggressions, even though the term is micro, can result in macro harm, such as the death of someone. I believe, for example, that Trayvon Martin was really profiled by by the individual who killed them, because he thought that Trayvon Martin, a Black youngster, was up to no good and suspect in that way.
So what do you think about this idea of cognitive control? I mean, how do we take those things that are outside of our awareness, bring them into our awareness so that we minimize these microaggressions?
That's really the major challenge, to make the invisible visible. If you're unaware that you have biases, they are likely to come out in situations in which you don't control. If you're aware that you have biases and you begin to think or feel some way, you can exercise the control that, hey, look at, why am I feeling upset and unsettled or scared? Well, it's because I'm associating, that type of awareness is important to achieve.
So do you think the Harvard implicit association test is a good tool to use? I haven't done any validity studies or anything like that. Is that a good tool to help?
Well, it's the IAT is used by a number of individuals to measure implicit bias. You're probably aware that there have been a lot of criticisms about it. I don't want to get into the technical argument of it, but the IAT and other similar measures that deal with immediate responses in situations are fairly, or as close as we are getting to the measure of implicit bias. And individuals who take the test oftentimes are really quite surprised that they show a certain form of bias that may be harmful to others.
Wow. So you also have a book associated with this concept. Can you tell us a little bit about your book?
You mean well, there's actually two of them. One of them is microaggressions in everyday life, race, gender, and sexual orientation. And the other one is race talk and the conspiracy of silence. The second one, race talk and the conspiracy of silence, really goes into the exploration about what makes it so difficult for people with power and privilege, let's say white individuals, to begin to explore themselves as racial cultural beings and deal with the hidden biases that they have. And we were, in our research, able to identify 4 different levels of resistance that makes it so difficult for people to begin to own up and acknowledge the fact that they have biases.
Wow. So what's the difference between having, so we have this group of folks now known as the alt-right who are using language around, being white and being proud. What's the difference between those folks and kind of your everyday white people who should really be paying attention to their ethnicity or paying attention to their race or whatnot? Is there a difference between those two?
There usually is. I would say that there are. When you talk about people at the alt-right, they are more aware of what their biases are. They believe they don't necessarily, there were 2 forms of racism that people talked about. One of them is the inferiority of people of color and the superiority of white people. People at the alt-right are more prone to believe that the white way is the right way. I mean, the reason why Donald Trump, for example, resonated so much with his Make America Great Again was, in essence, it was coded language, whether people were aware of it or not, of Make America White Again. And what I think I'm saying is that this is not simply one of race. What that saying evokes symbolically is Make America White Again. Make America again an America in which women knew their place. Make America again a world where people of color also knew their place and were not uppity. The people at the alt-right fear that a way of life that they have always valued is under assault from the diversity and the changing demographics that are going on. They've seen many of their values under attack, such as the belief that marriage is between a man and a woman. Religion is under attack. People of color have different values. Women are wanting equal rights. They may not say that, but it is appealing to a fear that their way of life is being threatened, that will disappear, and they are afraid of it. And so when Trump and the Tea Party and other groups came, they allowed an opportunity for many individuals who had that fear, and much of it is maybe not conscious, that this was appealing to them, that Trump was going to make America the America that we had before all of the diversity and multicultural issues that began to occur. And I see it as as almost, excuse me, as almost a backlash and almost a struggle, a death struggle, that there experiencing in terms of their way of life, and they are pushing back very hard right now. Um, excuse me, I was trying to drink some water and went down the wrong windpipe here. But that's what I see is happening. And I can almost predict that that there will be a counter pushback, because what's happening is that many marginalized groups in our society, I'm not just talking about about people of color. I'm talking about LGBTQ individuals. I'm talking about women. I'm talking about groups that are disempowered, who have all these years won certain things. And now the threat is that it's going to be taken away. And so you are going to see demonstrations, you're going to see conflict, you're going to see activism occurring, and it generally will occur first in the campuses, which is what we're going to see. And I think we're in for a period of turmoil, conflict and turmoil.
Yeah, so how do we, is our job then to kind of let this turmoil kind of play itself out, and you know, kind of water will find its level kind of thing? Or are there things that we can say as to our white brothers and sisters, that a rise of minorities is not a decline of the white experience?
You know, yeah, I think that's, you're striking upon this. And I think what needs to be stressed to people is the positive aspects of diversity and multiculturalism. And, you know, what gets written and focused in upon is generally the negative things that occur. And so what can white people gain as a result of you know, understanding and accepting diversity and different groups? I think that's the focus. I mean, there are individual, institutional, and societal benefits when all groups are, you know, are seen as one whole group. We haven't gotten there yet. We're at a point here where it's very divisive, where it's what they call a zero-sum game, where for someone to win, others must lose. What we have to do is work to the thing that we can all potentially benefit. And actually, the changing diversity in our society is inevitable. Unless we deal with it in a positive way, our nation, I think, will rise or sink, that, you know, on the basis of what we do and how we integrate individuals.
Cool. I'm gonna stop right there, and then we'll take a break. This reminds me of a conversation we had yesterday in the afternoon class, which, you know, talk about these micro inequities and what these microaggressions, this idea of discrimination. And we were talking about, someone brought up the fact that the greatness of our country, and our country is great. I think history will proclaim our greatness and continue that. One thought that was brought up was that America used to be known for its automobiles, right? So when Henry Ford rolled out the assembly line, he did not make the car. He wasn't the first to invent the car, but he did make the assembly line, right? So cars just became abundant. And what time have you heard about, or have you ever heard people talk about, was the heyday of the automobile industry? The 50s, 1950s. And people will even extend that to the 1960s, right? So 1950s and 60s. What kind of cars are typically named around this time, the 50s and 60s?
Studebakers and Cadillacs and Stingray was really big.
Stingray,
muscle cars
like what?
60s. Like a Mustang.
Mustang, right? So the sweet spot for Mustang is 1956 Mustang. Right? Or the Corvette, right? The Corvette, I'm just absolutely, and to be quite honest, we were the best at that particular time. Best cars. Yeah. SS, not Monte Carlo, what was Chevy SS, Super Sport, right? The Trans Am was birthed in the late 60s and made its ways into the 70s and 80s, right? The best. Or were we? Here's the caveat to this. What car do you drive today? What do you guys drive? Anybody drive a Toyota? I have a Toyota. Anyone have a Honda, Subaru, a Chevy, Ford? In the 1950s and 1960s, what were the selections of cars that one could choose from? Ford, GM. One more. Chrysler. What's that? Yeah. You want a Chrysler?
That's what I have.
Oh, sweet. Anybody have that Fiat? The little one or the big one, right? They're now owned by Chrysler too, right?
There's a big Chrysler plant in my hometown.
Oh, sweet. Are they making Fiats there or just?
They did for like a few months. I think they're making the Dart right now.
Okay.
Dodge Dart.
So first of all, through the 1950s and 1960s, why those three? Why were those the only three available? Context is everything. What's that?
Because they were like the biggest brands. All the other foreign cars were like BMWs were high luxury cars in Europe. It was really expensive to get them over here and sell them. Maybe I could be wrong though.
So this is what I want to offer you. Where are BMWs made?
Oh, there are enemies, right?
Partly. Where are they made? In Germany. What do you think is happening in Germany in the 1950s? What's Germany doing?
Trying to recover from all the war debts.
They're trying to recover from the war. Right? Honda. Where's Honda made? Japan. What's Japan doing in the 50s? Trying to recover from the war. Yes, we're the greatest automobile. We can build these empires because we have no what? We have no competition. Of course we're going to be the best. We don't have any competition. But now, Germany and Japan, they're not recovering anymore from the war. So now do we have the best cars in the world? I would suggest in many ways, yes. But I also would suggest that there are some folks who don't do so well, that the market makes adjustments for that, and that people have to remember this stuff. So what was the cause of our greatness? What was the result of that? Context is everything. If you don't understand the context, you don't understand these things. And that's why these microaggressions, this discrimination, this stuff becomes important, because if we don't recognize it, what the impact is on folks, we don't understand how they're operating in our organizations, in our schools, in our communities. So let's take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back. All right. Take a picture of this. That's cool. Wow. Just came across a news feed that in California, people who have marijuana convictions can get their records expunged. That's kind of cool. I mean, I think that's kind of cool, especially since it's legal in places.
I have a quick question for you.
Yes, sir.
Probably two. So for the league, when we have a league question, because we have the White Lake New York, right? There's a boy rock.
Yep.
That one too. And then there's
But we'll-
5.
Yep.
We're doing all those this week?
No.
Okay, which one should I do? Which one should I not?
Yeah, so we haven't watched the Boys of Baraka.
Yeah.
So you can't do that one.
Can't do that. But the White Lake New one.
We did
already.
White Lake, me, and
And then 5, we did that last night.
Day 5. We have not done that. So we can't do those.
So
So,
not those two. So the cost reduction, White Lake New one, please.
Yeah.
Okay, and then are you talking about the church thing tomorrow?
I can talk about it today.
I just want to know.
Yep. Cool.
When I follow the directions, gosh, I'm cold. How did I do? So having all the letters.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's
If
just.
you ever watch it, you saw it.
Yes, but everyone's.
Yeah, nothing wrong with Alabama.
Yeah.
Or stay rid of that.
I bought a mandolin and I also bought what's the guitar, you usually use steel guitars this way, but you lay them flat. What is that called?
I just know that's the state guitar.
Yeah, it's like a steel guitar, but it's actually the body of a guitar.
Okay.
So instead of laying it down, it's got 4 strings, and 2 of them are, I think, Ds.
Okay.
So it's got 2 D strings. And so, I forgot what it's called. But at any rate, so I just pick it. I don't play the guitar, but do you play?
I don't play guitar, no, I play tuba.
Oh, okay, tuba. Oh, well, it's quite an instrument.
Very heavy.
Yeah. Cool.
So is that like an open D tuning then?
That's what it is. It's open D tune.
Okay.
So it's tuned to open D.
Yeah.
It's a little folk guitar.
Yeah. A mandolin, I think is tuned A,
Okay.
open A, and a banjo is open G.
Okay.
So,
A mandolin has the same strings as a violin. Okay, sweet. I'm gonna know so much about how to play cello because we're gonna start my daughter with the Suzuki method of cello, so a parent has to be there. Anybody done that?
I put the cello, I didn't just do that.
Okay. Yeah, so and the cello is so cute.
It's so fun.
It's like this big, and it looks like a real cello. But she, you know, so,
The static ones don't sound as beautiful.
no, they don't. They
Wait till
don't.
you're at least a 3/4 size for it to sound good.
The but I got it from what's the guy's name in Pentatonic?
Which guy?
Oh, so yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. I was thinking about the African American. I was like, yeah, the guy with 2 legs, 2 arms, that guy. No, African American guy in Pentatonic. No, no, it's not. Okay. Did you know he's a cello player? Right. So that was one of his things that he I won't waste time. Okay, cool. So what I just passed out to you is an article that deals with a lot of this stuff. And what I'd like for you to do is that I'd like for you to take out an additional piece of paper as you read this. What I want you to do is to write. So this is an op-ed. This is an opinion piece. It's not an educational document, but it's someone's opinion on something. And I want you to. So the question that I'd like for you to address is. The question I'd like for you, I didn't give you one. I'm sorry, I apologize. So I know I want you to do pros and cons, right? So, but I'm having trouble formulating the question that I want you to think about in terms of pros and cons of what. So this is from a conservative think tank here in Minnesota, and they have they make a position statement, and their position statement is that diversity is destroying our educational system. And there are some, so when I read this, there are some things that I find to be valid, but there are also things that I find to be kind of bogus. And so what I'd like for you to do is to read this, and we'll spend probably, it's pretty dense, so maybe we'll spend about 20 minutes reading this. And I want you to think of things that either are pros or cons to diversity, or things that are valid and not valid. Maybe that's the best way to talk about that, right? So they make a position statement again that diversity is destroying our educational system, and I want you to. So if there are positive things you see in this article, put that in the positive column. If there are negative things you see in this, put them in the con column, or valid or invalid. Does that make sense? So just make your own notes. Are there some places where they have points? And I believe that there are places that their position statement does have some merit. But I also think that there are places that it doesn't have merit. So what I'd like you to do is to read that and make up for your own self, and then we'll come back and talk about that. All right. So I'll give you about 20 minutes to read through that. If I see that people have read through it faster than that, then I'll cut down on that time. All right? All right. We'll take just a couple more minutes, gone a little bit over what I said. It's a thick article, but it's dense. All right, let's stop right there. Thoughts, comments, observations over the article overall? Yes.
I thought it was really interesting that you pulled that This American Life up, because as soon as you started talking about this, I pulled up the transcript for that episode on my computer. So I was like, dang, same wavelength.
Same wavelength. And so you'll probably see where I'm going if you if you're familiar with this episode, and particularly with this this stuff. Thoughts? Yes.
On page 29, there's the picture of the kindergarten, like, teacher having different handprints, and underneath it says, educators have no business prompting immature and impressionable children to think in terms of skin color at all. And I work at the Child Development Center on campus, and we've done this before, but at never a point in time have we said, okay, kids, like, this is your skin color, we're gonna have other colors because some might be less important than others. It's just, we have handprints, we give them like skin colored paint to paint on it, and it's another thing, and you might talk about it in another sense, just like people look different, but we're all still people. But never, ever have we said, you are more or less valuable than someone else, even though your skin color is different. And so I think the way that they were trying to say it is like totally not what the teacher was trying to do, in my opinion.
So from personal experience,
From personal
from doing it yourself.
And that's with 2-year-olds.
With 2-year-olds. Other general impressions, yes.
I think it would be interesting if they got, like, obviously this is very one-sided, and it would be interesting if they got some more points of view from like people who actually like what's going on, just because this is definitely seems to be from the parents' point of view, and they commented that like the students are having less and less of a problem, which was what's happening. So, which makes me wonder, like, is there something happening in the classroom that the parents aren't aware of? If the students are okay with it, then I'm not. I'd be curious to see if they were paying attention to like what are the pros and cons, like what are people saying good about this process? What is happening that's good about
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. Again, this is a position paper, right? So they have a particular thing that they're going after. But what are they using to suggest that their position that things aren't going well? I want to hear from somebody that have heard from you. Yes.
Well, this also goes with what I was noticing, is like the author uses statistics of like scores, but they also don't mention at all the scores of the white students. But they also talk about how the purpose of this, like the all in all thing, was to try and balance out like the differences between the scores of white students and minorities. But they don't say anything about like the difference in white scores, so they still could be fine.
Yeah. One thing I want you to be mindful of, and I made note of this in this, is right on page 29, that first column, and let's say paragraph 1, 2, 3, and it talks about the education gap. Who is doing the best?
Asian students.
Asian students. So I have a problem. I can't understand why they have a black and white gap when white people aren't doing the best. So where should the gap actually be? Asian and everybody else if they're doing the best. So why does white become the point of whatever? And I don't have an answer. I want you to answer that. I just want you to think about that. I mean, I think that's of particular interest to me, is that the students who are doing the best, we're not looking at them as the model or their scores. Yes.
Well, I mean,
I definitely get what you're saying. It might be that Asian and white were pretty close at the top, and then there was a huge gap. I'm not actually sure. They don't tell us that, so they probably should have done a full layout of percentages. But on the first page, they are giving the statistics for the entire district. They're giving the statistics for achievement of all the students and their test scores from the last 10 years. So there is something there, like obviously something is causing these scores to drop. And I think there are probably a lot of different factors contributing to this. But what I got as a big point of this article is that less time is being spent on reading and writing because there's so much more time being spent on talking about all of this, all these different issues, whether it's sexual orientation or racial issues and equity and all those kinds of things. So I think that's a big part of the article is that what are we spending our time on in the classroom and what is the responsibility of teachers as far as what they're teaching in the classroom and during the school day.
Yes.
Because if less time is being spent, I'm not saying that it's bad to spend time on what they are spending time on, but if you spend less time on math and reading, it makes sense that math and reading scores are going to drop.
So although this is a position paper and it's clear what their position is, are there merits to the argument as presented in this piece? Are there merits? So what might be some of the merits of the argument? Yes.
Based on what we read, it does seem like there is an element of blame in the classroom on white men. I've seen that in society for sure, and that's not how all white men are either. So I mean, like I can definitely understand why, like high school students who are both men and white would be taken aback by that. Like, oh, well, because of society, I'm horrible and I feel like attacked in my own classroom. I can understand why that's a bad thing, and I think that's like an important element to bring up when you're trying to make it like a safe space for everyone, especially and not blaming some of your students for problems in society.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the points they made was that they shouldn't be pushing these agendas in the classroom, but rather teaching critical thinking. And I have heard, like I know a lot of kids who are still in high schools, and I hear from them that it really is a very hostile environment in the classroom sometimes. And somebody who's a white male or even a lot of white females feel like they really can't share their opinion. They can't have an open space to discuss. So they're losing kind of the opportunity to develop critical thinking skills because a lot of the teachers and classmates are coming from this point of view. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have these kinds of discussions in the classroom, but I think that there really is a lot of weight to the argument that classrooms, especially in high school, are becoming a hostile environment for people who are not of any minority to be able to discuss and learn to think critically.
But yes.
On page 28, it says, like the last column, it says students and parents fear bullying and retaliation in terms of grades in the classroom. Going off of what Elizabeth just said, like, I don't know how I'd feel if I was in a classroom setting and I know that the way that I would share my opinion would cause me to get a negative grade. Like, that is absolutely not okay. So I feel like that's a part that's valid in what the students are saying. Like, they have these feelings. But I think it's also part of, like, the teachers, like, if they're getting this from the principal, like, they're going to do what they're told so they can have their job. There might not, I don't think the intent is like, oh, I'm going to make all my students fear me, so therefore they will have the same opinion as me. I hope that's not what teachers do. But that's a real thing apparently for some of the high school students, that they fear their grade will be significantly lower.
Are there things that are bogus about this particular? Yes.
Page 28, first column, it says, in U.S. literature and composition class, 11th graders are being taught to apply Marxist, feminist, and post-colonial lenses to literature. When you do that, that's like a literary technique that you apply different lenses to literature. And those are like the most common and like usually easiest lenses to put to, especially if you're doing like cross-curricular stuff. I know that a lot of 11th graders might take U.S. history, and then you're learning about those kinds of events and being able to apply that to literature.
Because the idea is for contrast, right? For developing the skills of contrasting, not indoctrination.
Yeah, you're not teaching them to be
Marxist, but you're
looking at someone who may have been a Marxist, or you're looking at that view of literature in order to understand literature through a different lens. And that argument, I think, is bogus, that they're saying they're teaching this in literature class as someone who is a literature person. Right?
Are there other parts of this that are yes?
Well, this one's similar to what Kelly was saying, but on page 31, they're talking about like the poster, about like asking about people in terms of skin color. And they say at the end of like the little paragraph at the bottom, ironically, the project conditions young children to do the very thing it condemns. But there's like no evidence or proof in any way. There's not even like a comment from anyone. It's just something the person said.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, it frustrates me that there's no sense of proof or even opinions of anyone but her.
So one thing I want to be very transparent about is that as an instructor, I try to, although some of the resources that we have at our disposal aren't often as balanced as I would personally like, but we try to present the argument in a pretty fair, balanced way. This particular article, I've told a number of, so I've encouraged a number of very left-leaning people, and I think it's funny, they use the phrase the far left, which I've never heard, I don't know what that is, so that's kind of interesting. I do know people who call themselves the far right, right, or the alt-right or whatever, but the idea that there's a far left is kind of interesting. To read this, because I do think that there is a tendency, and we've talked about kind of this pendulum swing, right, to try to justify things from the past, but we know that it's very difficult to find that equilibrium. What I also know is I find it interesting that all of the schools that Edina compares itself to in terms of its educational prowess, I think we can find that on page, put a dot by that. It's like one of the very first paragraphs. I think it's page 28 at the top. Yeah, who does it measure itself against, or how does it?
Schools with more diversity.
So let's go back to what has happened, schools, equity. I marked it. Let me see. It actually identifies itself with schools like Orono and Wayzata, and what was the other one?
Apple Valley.
Yeah. What page is that? On page 28, that first? Page 27. Oh, yes, right there. That's where. And then ordinary students. I thought that was an interesting choice of words. Ordinary students. But yeah, what do you also recognize about Orono and Wayzata and Apple Valley? What is also true about those areas? Yes.
Well, I know it's more affluent suburbs, right?
So they're more affluent suburbs.
I don't know anything about the diversity because I didn't grow up in cities, but.
What can we extrapolate about the fact that they're more affluent?
Probably mostly white.
Probably mostly white, right? Or heavily white, which is not a problem. It's not problematic. But one of the things that we know is that, well, yeah, we can get into this. We got time. So I'm gonna play a part. Yes.
Doesn't it say that Eastview had 82% of students were reading at level and 83% were doing well at math, and then Eastview has a much larger minority and low income students than Edina?
Yes, it does. So that argument doesn't hold either, does it? Right? That it's race-based. That argument doesn't hold. So are folks familiar with Ruby Bridges? Do you know who Ruby Bridges is? Okay. So if you don't, write down Ruby Bridges. She is a young lady who was the first to integrate schools in Louisiana. There was a group of people who were, there was a family, and they had all agreed to show up on the first day of school and walk their kids into the school building. Unfortunately, Ruby's Twitter account wasn't working that day, and she did not get the email. She didn't get the Snapchat. She didn't get. I'm joking, Snapchat. Right? So she ended up walking to school by herself in front of hundreds of angry white people. She's 7 years old, and she encounters this crowd by herself. I almost cried just thinking about what that would be like for my daughter, to meet a mob of people who are spitting and cussing and yelling at her and saying, "Go home." And she knows nothing better than to go to school. And so Norman Rockwell drew this painting of Ruby Bridges, and it's entitled "The Problem We All Live With." And so I want to play part of this episode, and I'll send the rest home for you to listen to in an email. But this directly helps us to understand some of the arguments that are made in this document. Are people familiar with Michael Brown? Right. So Michael Brown was shot. Now there's questions about his character. There's questions about all this about him. What we do know is that his body was left on the ground for 4 hours before medical personnel came to pick up his body. Not cool. No matter what no matter what your personhood is, not cool. We also know that he went to a school in Normandy. Interestingly enough, I didn't know that he went to a school in Normandy, which is outside of St. Louis, which for all intents and purposes is St. Louis, but it's a suburb of St. Louis. And I worked at that school. And in the 90s. And while we were working at that school, it had some severe problems. The community had problems. It was just this greatness of the automobile industry was felt in that community as well, right? So where I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, became the Rust Belt. We used to make Dayton tires. We used to do all these things, and when we stopped making cars the way we used to, and steel became expensive, it decimated my community, and Florissant, Missouri is one of those places as well. And so I had to put all the pieces together, but it would make sense that, not that it would make sense, but it further explained both Michael Brown's demeanor being in that environment, as well as some other things. And so This American Life did a story a couple of years ago, and so now it's probably about 5 years old, but I want you to think about the modern context that this particular story is developed. So I'll go ahead and start playing this.
Nicole Hannah-Jones is an investigative reporter these days in the New York Times. We've I was on this American Life before too. For the first real reporting job was back in 2003. She was reporting on the schools in Durham, North Carolina. And like most places, there were good schools, there were bad schools. And at the time, it was the heyday of No Child Left Behind. Durham was working really hard to improve the bad schools.
And I would go to schools and they would just always be trying these new things that actually sounded like they might work. They would do things like, well, we'll put a great magnet program here, or we're going to really focus on literacy. We're going to start an early college high school, which kids would earn college credit in high school. We're going to improve teacher quality. We're going to replace the principals, more testing. They're always talking really about the same things. I mean, you could take these conversations and go from district to district to district, and you will always hear the same things.
What you noticed was that it never worked. I mean, like, never. The bad schools never caught up to the good schools. And the bad schools were mostly Black and Latino. The good schools, mostly white. And sure, there might be a principal here or a charter school there. They might do a good job improving student scores, but even there, they were just improving their student scores. The minority kids in their programs were still not performing on par with white kids. They hadn't closed the achievement gap between Black kids and white kids.
And my question is, all of these different ways that we say we're going to address this issue aren't working. So what actually works? And that's what I really began to look at. And I find this one thing that really worked, that cut the achievement gap between Black and white students by half.
By half?
By half. But it's the one thing that we're not really talking about and that very few places are doing anymore.
That thing that is so effective but never discussed, that's not one of the tools that educators reach for normally. Can you guess?
Integration.
I mean, there's integrated schools of getting Black kids and white kids together in the same schools.
Yes.
Old-fashioned Brown versus Board of Education, 1954 technology, little kids on buses.
That's right. Actually, what the statistics show is that between 1971, which is where the nation really started doing massive desegregation, and 1988, which was the peak of integration in the United States. 1988 was
school integration.
School integration, yes. Well, the data shows that kind of at the start of early desegregation, the achievement gap between Black and white students was about 40 points.
In other words, on standardized reading tests in 1971, Black 13-year-olds tested 39 points worse than white kids. That dropped to just 18 points by 1988 at the height of desegregation. The improvement in math scores was close to that, though not quite as good. And these scores are not just the scores of the specific kids who got bused into white schools. That is the overall score for the entire country. That's all Black children in America, halved in just 17 years. When I asked Nicole if that was fast, she was all like, well, Black people first arrived on this continent as slaves in 1619. So it was 352 years to create the problem. So yeah, another 17 to cut that school achievement gap in half, pretty fast.
And so if you kind of picture that out, if we had kept going, when we had cut it by half, I don't know that we would have eliminated it totally because, there's a long history here, but you could see where we would be been like so close to eliminating it.
Nicole, why does it work?
I think it's important to point out that it is not that something magical happens when Black kids sit in a classroom next to white kids. It's not that suddenly a switch turns on and they get intelligence or wanting, the desire to learn when they're with white kids. What integration does is it gets Black kids in the same facilities as white kids, and therefore it gives them access to the same things that those kids get, quality teachers and quality instruction.
The U.S. Department of Education put out data in 2014 showing that Black and Latino kids in segregated schools have the least qualified teachers, the least experienced teachers. They also get the worst course offerings, the least access to AP and upper level courses, the worst facilities. The other thing about most segregated Black schools, Nicole says, is that they have high concentrations of children who grew up in poverty. Those kids have greater educational needs, they're more stressed out, they have a bunch of disadvantages. And when you put a lot of kids like that together in one classroom, studies show, it doesn't go well.
If you're surrounded by a bunch of kids who are all behind, you stay behind. But if you're in a classroom that has some kids behind and some kids advanced, the kids who are behind tend to catch up. These kids in these classes in schools of concentrated poverty don't have that. They don't have that effect of kids who can help boost them. Everyone's behind. And then they're getting the worst teacher. So it's not even like they're getting the same quality teachers as kids who are advanced. They're getting worse teachers. When you combine those two things, it is almost impossible to undo that harm. You have to break that up.
This is why, after years of studying this, Nicole thinks segregated schools full of poor kids are probably never going to catch up to other schools. The job's simply too hard. But integration, okay, before I talked to Nicole about this, I had this vague sense about integration, maybe you had this too, that we tried that, it didn't go so well, which Nicole has heard before.
Yeah, that's a pretty common thought. People say, well, we tried to force it and it just didn't work out. And typically what people are thinking of are places like Boston, where busing was used and where it was violent and ugly and white people just left and didn't want to deal with it.
White people fled the school systems and basically they resegregated the school systems by fleeing.
Right. And I should be clear, I'm a product of busing myself. And I rode a bus 2 hours a day.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Waterloo, Iowa. And yes, there are Black people in Iowa. I get that question all the time.
Nicole says that her parents sent her and her sister to a school across town, which was all white, except for 5 Black kids, which included the 2 of them.
And at the time, I didn't realize that it was a busing or integration program. Parents told me to get on the bus and go to school, and I went where the bus took me. But I didn't really understand until I started covering education that we were part of a desegregation program. And one of the things that has been challenging as I write these stories is knowing that busing for me was actually very hard. It was, we had to get up really early, but also we were being taken out of our community into someone else's community, where not only was it a white community, but a wealthy community. And I was coming from a very Black working class community. And so socially it was very difficult. You just never felt like you belonged or it was your school. I had friends and I could go to their house, but they couldn't come to mine. Mm-hmm. And there was this time when I was in middle school, there was a pool on our side of town, and there was another pool on the other side of town. And we used to always go to the pool on the white side of town. And one day I was like, hey guys, why don't you come to my house and we can go to the pool on my side of town? And all my white friends were like, yeah, we're gonna do it. And then that morning, one by one, they called and said they couldn't come. And to this day, that devastates me. I'll never forget how that felt, because I knew why. I knew why they did that.
What'd they say?
They just said, oh, our mom said we can't come, but you can come over here. Every last one of them. I mean, that's the thing, is like this, we want this to have been easy. And we gave up really fast. I mean, there was really one generation of school desegregation. There's a lot of data that shows that Black students going through court-ordered integration, it changed their whole lives. They were less likely to be poor. They were less likely to have health problems. They lived longer. And the opposite is true for Black kids who remained in segregated schools.
It's so funny, like you say, well, how do we know that integration works? Like you're saying, kind of like, well, you know from the evidence of your own life.
I know from my own life, and now being able to look at like the longitudinal data on it, realizing that, yes, I am living the life that that data says you live when you have the opportunity to go to integrated school.
So Integration works, and yet we do not discuss it usually as the logical way to fix schools.
And I think I'm so obsessed with this because we have this thing that we know works. That the data shows works, that we know is best for kids. And we will not talk about it. And it's not even on the table.
And so today, we thought we would put it on the table and talk about it. From WBEZ Chicago, it's This American Life. I'm Eric Glass. Today, after years where very few communities were launching new desegregation programs, Nicole found a place that just 3 years ago, unintentionally, started school desegregation. Seriously, nobody in charge planned this. A school system got integration, and Nicole got to see what happens to the kids, what happens with the parents, which is not pretty, and what happens with the politics in modern day America when school desegregation shows up uninvited to the table by any of the usual people in charge. Stay with us. And with that, I will turn things over to Nicole. A quick heads up, somebody uses a racial slur in this first part of the story.
I stumbled on this place by accident. I was watching the coverage of Michael Brown almost a year ago, like the rest of America. There was one moment that I could not get out of my head. It's news footage of his mother, Leslie McSpadden, right after he was killed.
This was wrong, and that was cold-hearted. Cold-hearted.
She's standing in a crowd of onlookers, a few feet from where her son was shot down, where he would lie face down on the concrete for 4 hours, dead. And this is what she says.
You took my son away from me. You know how hard it was for me to get him to stay in school and graduate? You know how many black men graduate? Not many.
I watched this over and over. A police officer has just killed her oldest child. It has to be the worst moment of her life. But of all the ways she could have expressed her grief and outrage, this is what was on her mind. School. Getting her son through school. Michael Brown became a national symbol of the police violence against Black youth. But when I looked into his education, I realized he's also a symbol of something else, something much more common. Most Black kids will not be shot by the police, but many of them will go to a school like Michael Brown's. It took me all of 5 minutes on the internet to find out that the school district he attended is almost completely Black, almost completely poor, and failing badly. The district is called Normandy. It's made up of one high school, the one that Michael Brown attended, a middle school, and 5 elementary schools. It's in a town also called Normandy that borders on Ferguson. Each year, the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education puts out a report that shows how each of its 520 school districts is doing. It's a numeric snapshot of the type of education students are receiving. Districts get points for academic achievement, for how many students graduate, for how well they're prepared for college. In 2014, Michael Brown's senior year, here's how the Normandy School District was performing. Points for academic achievement in English, 0. Math, 0. Social studies, 0. Science, 0. Points for college placement, 0. It seems impossible, but in 11 of 13 measures, the district didn't earn a single point. 10 out of 140 points. That was its score. It's like how they say you get points on the SAT just for writing your name. It's like they got 10 points just for existing. Normandy is the worst district in the state of Missouri. Maybe Michael Brown's mom knew these scores, or maybe she just knew her son's school didn't graduate about half of its Black boys. I don't know. I reached out to her several times and she didn't want to talk. But in the Normandy district, mothers who are worried about the quality of the schools aren't hard to find. Over the last couple of months, I spent a lot of time with one of them, a Normandy mother named Nidra Martin. And it was through her that I learned the story of something that happened in this district, something that almost never happens anymore. Nidra grew up in Normandy and works in human resources. Her daughter, Maria, is a star student. Still, Nidra found herself worrying about Maria's education all the time.
Maria, to be honest with you, she wasn't having the problem. I'm just going to say, she's an awesome child, okay? I love her.
When you ask them questions, Nidra and Maria, their eyes fix on each other. I've got a daughter, and I kept wondering what magic parenting spell Nidra has cast to get her teenage daughter to like her so much. Nidra's older daughter went to Normandy too. She almost didn't graduate on time because the school lost track of her credits. By the time Maria got to middle school, little things started happening that began to worry Nidra even more. Maria usually brought home A's, but when she got a C, Nidra asked the teacher why she had not been notified. The teacher told her that she had too many kids in her class to call all their parents. Nidra said teachers did not seem to care. Classes were dumbed down and often unorganized and unruly, and even things that should have been good news turned to bad news. In 7th grade, Maria was invited to a special breakfast. It was to celebrate kids who made the honor roll. They began calling kids up one by one to get their certificates.
I'm like, okay, I'm next. And then another name gets called, and I had to remind myself A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, P. And I'm like, my name is Pruitt Martin. You guys skipped Pruitt.
They never called her name. When Maria asked the school counselor about it, the counselor told Maria maybe she wasn't supposed to be there. Nidra, who had taken off of work to come, was watching from the side.
She looked at me and I looked at her. Then I was like, yeah, something's wrong. Something is wrong. I almost started crying, really, because I felt not embarrassed, but like really, really like disappointed.
Maria had the invitation to the breakfast in her bag. She brought it just in case something like this happened. Think about that. This is a 12-year-old girl who was so used to the school screwing things up that she knew enough to bring proof. It was a small thing, but for Nidra and Maria, it was the last straw. Nidra knew that the district had been performing poorly for years. In fact, it had been on probation for 15 years. Schools in Missouri get accredited by the state. Almost every district is accredited. But if you're doing really bad, you get put on notice. That's called provisional accreditation. That's supposed to be like a warning. But Normandy had provisional accreditation for 15 years. That means there are entire classes of students, nearly all of them Black, who came in as kindergartners and graduated 12 years later without ever having attended a school that met state standards. In the St. Louis area, nearly 1 in 2 Black children attend schools and districts that perform so poorly, the state has stripped them of full accreditation. Only 1 in 25 white children are in a district like that. That's 1 in 2 Black kids, 1 in 25 white kids.
Let me leave you right there. If you're the parent, what are you trying to do with your kid?
Get them to a different school.
I'm gonna get them to a different school. I'm gonna get them into a different school. Why?
Like top high quality teachers have the opportunity to succeed by the standards of not just that school.
Right. So just like we talked about the young lady who had a 3.8, and she thought that was a 4.0. She was acting like it was a 4.0, right? I also can't be in an environment that teaches me that a 3.8 is a 4.0 or a 2.5 is good. Now, I will tell you this about my own, I got 7 minutes. I'll tell you about my own community. So the state of Ohio, so I graduated high school in Dayton, Ohio. I think I've mentioned Dayton a few times. It's important, we'll see some other stuff later, but they they augmented the requirements for athletes to play sports throughout the state. And I thought it was just my town that did this, but actually my town was one of the last holdouts for this. So, does anybody know what famous NFL relationship Ohio has? The Football Hall of Fame. I'm glad you know that. Yes. Have you been there?
No,
Okay, cool. Yeah, the Football Hall of Fame is in Ohio, and there's a reason why. Ohio is there's if you are from Ohio, you are automatically a Buckeye. Just automatically. Even if you don't claim being a Buckeye, you're already a Buckeye. And some of you know exactly what I mean about that, Ohio State football team. So they augmented the requirements for athletes for student athletes to play. Where you grew up in your K-12 experience, whatever sport you were playing, if it was from badminton to tennis to football to rugby to lacrosse to basketball, was there an academic requirement for your participation? Yes, and typically what was the level of that requirement for your academic participation? Passing, give me a grade.
Is it 2.5?
So a 2.5 or a C, right? What was that?
You can have 2 C's.
Or you can have 2 C's.
You have to have.
Okay, so and a plan to bring them up. But for most of us, around that C level, around that 2.5 level was the threshold for participating in education, in athletics. The state of Ohio and my particular school district just augmented that because they want students to participate at all levels. So they augmented that to a 1.0. Now, many of you drew back and are surprised by that because I am as well. My sister has 4 kids in the public school system that we grew up in. When they augmented that, guess what they did for my sister in terms of tools of parenting? Yeah, they eliminated it. So I'm calling my nephew now because he's like, all I need is a 1 point. I can still play ball. And my sister used to say, if you don't get your grades up, you can't. And that was a carrot that she would use. But they just took that away in this idea of trying to have all students have access to this particular thing. What are they consequently saying about the education process in the state of Ohio? What's that?
Sports matter more.
Sports matter more than education. Sports matter more than education. Love Ohio State. Love. I am a Buck. Whoa, I know the song. The whole thing. But what happens when your knee gets blown out?
Yeah, no options left.
No options.
College anymore.
Right? So you can make that $1 million. You can be LeBron James as long as you have LeBron James's workout and his knees. Right? So I want you to think about over. So I'll toss this out to you. Would it be better for us to complete this this podcast in class, or would you prefer to do it on your own? People are like, in class, because I have Netflix to watch at home. All right, so we'll complete that in class. I'll see you tomorrow. We'll also talk about this weekend and possible next weekend. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. Thank you so much. Yeah, and now post this. Aye.